Welcome. I'm your host, Timea Urban, the Urban Healer. I'm a life coach, Reiki master, Akashic record reader, and registered nurse. Hello, and welcome to the Discover Your Joy podcast. My name is Timea Urban, and I'll be your host. And today I actually have a very special guest. I'm going to be doing an interview with Briana Rose, and she is a licensed mental health counselor, a yoga instructor, and the founder of the Hack Your Nervous System deck. I absolutely love this deck, and it is going to be linked below, and I do have a promo code. And this is a 60 card neuroscience-based deck that is based on mind-body practices and on various traditions, including yoga, Qigong, Buddhism, Eastern medicine, and somatic therapy. So I love this because these are cards that you can use in a moment of stress, whether it's acute stress, whether it's just moderate stress, mild stress, and it actually tells you something to do. So rather than just spiraling, you have a way of grounding and actually working with that energy, which is why I absolutely love this. And I really recommend it to everyone. Side note, not a paid ad. This is just something I love. So I have to say that. So Brianna, thank you for being here. I'm so excited to chat with you.
Oh my gosh, I'm super, super excited. For everyone watching, this is actually the first time that Timea and I have ever actually seen each other in vivo and talk like this in person. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, no, it's actually truly wild. And it just shows that you can meet really wonderful people online and you can form really deep connections without actually ever meeting. So there are massive positives on social media as well.
Yes.
Dang. Okay, the first question I wanted to just dive into is kind of like, who are you? What is your story? How did you get here? I know, super like open-ended question. But I just want to hear a little bit of how you even got here because I feel like this deck is so beautiful. It has so much soul that there is a story behind it. So I'd love for you to share with.
Yeah, I think about this question a lot, and the question is, the answer for it is not so flowery and beautiful. It really did come through like a lot of suffering. I have struggled with anxiety from the time I was very young, and it always came through in sort of like compulsive actions. So I would be the person doing the compulsive hand washing. I went through a series of eating disorders, and once I started working with my actual mental health and stopping the compulsive actions, I was left with this sort of core energy of anxiety. And it was so intense, and it was such a body-based experience, and it was also ruminating thoughts, and it was incredibly overwhelming. And at that point, I was already licensed as a therapist. And in a lot of therapy programs right now, they don't actually have you go to therapy through the program. So I was in the field and offering assistance to people while simultaneously dealing with this incredibly intense anxiety inside of me. So I started on this process of doing every single training possible that dealt with anxiety at the body-based nervous system level. And I started collecting all of these techniques. And I already had a yoga background. My parents are chiropractors, so the importance of body-based approaches were always very clear to me that there was something that we needed to add alongside talk therapy. So, and that's why I kind of veered off of, for a while, I veered almost completely off of the talk therapy, and then I started to weave them together. But the process of doing those trainings and really working with my own process of anxiety and struggles internally gave birth to this card deck. Over the course of like literally 10 years of just dealing with this really intense, raw anxiety, I started collecting every single thing that was effective for me and realized that there's nowhere that all of this is condensed together. And there's no reason why anyone should have to go through that many trainings in order to get these really important tools that everyone should have, and information that everyone should be able to have them in their little backpack to be able to face life in a way that feels more empowered and a little bit more in control. And thus came Hack Your Nervous System.
I absolutely love that. And like, I do want to just kind of say that this is not common knowledge, which is really concerning. And I do totally agree. I mean, like I have a therapist, I have a very specialized therapist, but for my personal opinion, I didn't have much breakthroughs when it came to just talk therapy, because then you're like logical mind. Okay, got it. My nervous
Mm-hmm.
shot. And you still got to like look
Right.
into your subconscious mind of like what's lingering, what have you like suppressed, what have you like completely forgotten about, and that trauma like lives
Right.
in your body. It's like I'm actually also a yoga instructor, and that is how I always handled my stress. But then it would become, frantically going to yoga every single day and becoming
Right.
addicted, which I think is
Yeah.
interesting because it's like that addiction is okay, but other addictions aren't. But it is truly still an
Mm-hmm.
addiction for me. That was
Right.
something that I really like leaned into. But I love this because, and like I'll say it on the podcast, we talked for a second before. I recommended this to my therapist, and she was like, I've never had a deck created like this. She's like, I've never used a deck this good before. And she does a lot of research like this. And she's actually somatic yoga instructor. And then she's specialized in like EMDR and internal family systems. So like she's very educated. And she's like, I've never seen a deck like this. It's incredible. And I love this because it's like when you're in a state of spiral, you're not going to be like, what are my tools? What could I do? Pick a card
Right.
and he'll tell you. I
Right.
absolutely love that. So then I guess you kind of answered my next question of like, what was that aha moment of I'm going to create a deck? But it's like you could have gone different routes. Like you could have written a book, you could have done a blog. What was like, I want a deck of cards?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great question. And it was a really synchronistic moment, as it kind of has to be when something like that comes through.
Mm-hmm.
I was at a very stuck point in my career. The talk therapy that I was offering to people was just extraordinarily draining. And I felt like I was pushing the somatic techniques as well in a way that it didn't really feel like it was flowing. They weren't asking me for it. I was like, here, take these things. And they were like, didn't ask you for that. I just wanted to talk to you. So I was having this feeling of difficulty in weaving it into my actual therapy practice. And I started asking, just like opening up the inquiry, what can I do with this information? Like, show me what comes next, because I really don't know. And I feel incredibly stuck. And within a couple of days, I had a supervisor from my internship. She called me and she was like, hey, what are you doing? What are you up to these days? I kept trying to explain to her what I was doing.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, I said, what I'm really trying to do is help people to hack their nervous systems. And my brain was like, and it kind of like, it was such an aha moment that like I just had this massive reaction internally. And sort of simultaneous to the name coming through, the idea of the card deck came through, because it just feels so accessible.
Yeah.
When you're in a state of anxiety or panic, your capacity and willingness to pick up a book and read something, very small. There's a reason why we go to our phones first, and it's because it's very accessible, it's very easy, it's sort of like it takes the least amount of brain power. So I wanted to create something that also took very little brain power in order to access, because we don't even have that brain power within our grasp when we're in a state of anxiety. So
Yeah.
something that could really, really easily be used and could be broken up in a way that you're actually starting to work with your nervous system in the way that the nervous system works. So not just pulling at these random interventions and practices and hoping, like, I don't know why I was going to say throwing shit at the wall and hoping something sticks. That's not the terminology
Spaghetti?
whatsoever.
Spaghetti? Is it spaghetti at the
I
wall?
don't know.
I know
But,
someone who
just,
said that before. They like, the noodles are done when you take a noodle and you throw it at the wall. I'm like, you do
yeah,
that? That's a thing. I'm like, I just bite it and
yeah.
I'm gonna spit it out. But yeah, no, it's like what's gonna stick, what's gonna work.
Right,
Like I
right.
find that perfectly said, just because people forget, and like this is something that I'm like wildly passionate about. If your nervous system isn't regulated, nothing will stick. Nothing will stick.
Right.
And it's like I feel like I say this in every single one of my podcasts, and I will continue saying it in every single one of my podcasts. You can be eating the organic kale. You could be on all the supplements. You could be like check mark doing all the right things. But if your nervous system actually isn't regulated, it's not going to work. And it's like, if you're
Right.
trying to get pregnant, you're not going to get pregnant. If you're trying to like get rid of that bloating, the bloating's not going to go away. If you're trying to manifest something like your dream partner or whatever, if you don't have the capacity to hold that, you're not going to be able to let it like come in, or it's going to come and it's going to somehow leave, self-sabotage, or you won't be able to hold the energy of that. So then
Right.
like my thing was, and I feel like I asked you to come into my life. I'm like, my background is neuroscience. I'm a registered nurse and I specialize in neuroscience for that. But then that's more like, hemorrhagic stroke or like spinal cord injury, brain tumor. But then I'm obsessed with the neuroscience of how does your body brain work? Because that is like the internal
Right.
functioning of us. And then it's like, I agree. If you're stuck in a moment, you're not going to like Google it. You're going to go on Instagram to numb, or you're going to buy something.
Right.
You're not going to read a
Right.
book, even though like I'm sure we all have beautiful, abundant libraries of a lot of information.
Oh, so many crying books that are just waiting to be opened. Yeah,
You
for
know,
sure.
that's not going to work. So I'm just like, what is an easy way for people to learn to like manage their nervous system? And like, I've gone through the layers of just like, I'm a Reiki practitioner, like breath work, cold therapy. But then I'm like, if you're having anxiety at 2 in the morning, the cold therapy place is closed. And it's like, you might not be able to
Right.
guide yourself with breath work if you don't know how to do that, because you're just going to like hyperventilate and almost make it worse. So it's like, what is
Mm-hmm.
the way for people to have something to look at? And it's like, obviously on the podcast, people can't see it, but the deck is beautiful. And like, I love that it's color coded. And again, it's like beautifully labeled. It's like, are you having acute stress? And I love how like, even just going through the deck, there's a couple things that I didn't even know about. And it's so interesting because I'm like, I do these now, like planking it. I didn't know that if you're in acute stress, you plank it out. Like, that's
Mm-hmm.
fantastic. And it's like, I just love how it's so simple, it's so beautiful. And like, you have very clear directions. And it also tells you kind of like the why of why you're doing it. So I literally, quotations, force people to buy this. Slash, I just like gift it to everyone. I'm like, this is like my gift of like, here's your nervous system. I want to regulate it and happy. Here you go. Love that.
Mm.
Now, I will kind of mention, how did I meet you? Because I put up a poll for some questions for people who follow me on Instagram. And one of the questions was kind of, what's the backstory of how did I meet you? And it's just, I mean, it's not a huge story. I'm so sorry. I wish this was like a huge moment, but I was really looking for something like this. And I was also like looking for something that's like a mindful gift that I can give as like, this is the perfect gift for everyone. And I was like, how can I also strengthen my toolbox for my own anxiety? Because I feel you. I've had debilitating anxiety that has made me not make good choices. That was an awkward sentence, but it's like
Mm-hmm.
make really poor decisions because I was like, this needs to stop and I can't, like,
Right.
trapped in my body. And then of course, as we're practitioners with mental health, we're going to attract people who are like us. And then it's like, it's almost like seeing them struggle. You're just like, what can I do to help you? I can't give you my decade worth of become a yoga instructor, become a Reiki master.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, how can I like condense it? So I was kind of looking for something out there that's like really easy for people to kind of just get the cold notes, which this is beautifully written.
Right.
And I was just on Instagram, and somebody that I follow who I really respect posted about your card deck. And I don't know why, because like, I don't like, they usually don't pop up in my stories. I don't speak to them regularly. Like, we have common friends, but very disconnected overall. And for some reason, this deck just like caught my eye. And I was like, what is that? And then when I clicked on it, I was like, I want this. I'm like, this needs to be mine immediately. And then the moment I got them, I was like, hi, I'm Timea. Can I order many of these? Because my clients need these. And then that's kind of just how it happened. And then we've created a beautiful friendship through DMs. Like, that's our story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Also,
literally. And I want to reflect that I remember you writing to me so clearly because your energy came through very, very, very clearly to the point where I felt this need to like send you a voice note back because it was just like the sweetest energy just like flowing over me. I was like, who is this human being? I love her already. So
Thank you. I received that compliment because I do. I mean, like for me, doing everything with intention, I think is really important. So it's like even when I like create something or I send an email, like before I send out my like emails, I'm literally like, feel the love, feel that, feel that. I'm just like, why not? You can work with energy, play with it. And I'm glad you received that so
I
clearly.
felt it. It was climactic to me. You say it's anticlimactic. I was like, ah, the angels have ascended upon me with this human and the sweetness that she has to share with me. So,
And then she hasn't been able to get rid of me since. Thank you.
mm-hmm. Not
I love
complaining.
that. Perfect. I'm here for it. Oh my God, that's absolutely amazing. Oh, that's it's so funny because like the universe will always bring you the right people for the next step. But then that also
Mm-hmm.
comes down to, are you ready to receive it? And that's kind of like a little segue
Right.
of just like people know what they want. So it's like, I want the partner, I want the bigger house, I want the bigger income. But I'm like, is your nervous system ready to receive that? Because if you haven't healed certain things, it's not, it can't land.
Right.
So again, get this deck ASAP, pretty please. So the next thing that was asked was, tell us a little bit more about the vagus nerve and what are some ways of stimulating it, especially when you're super triggered.
Okay. So this could be a very, very large, obtuse subject, but I'm going to sort of simmer it down to the basics.
Yes, I love the
It's
vagus
good to
nerve.
think of the vagus nerve as the brain body connection. It's a cranial nerve, so it's a nerve of the brain, and it goes from the base of your spine. It goes all the way down to the heart, the lungs, the diaphragm, the belly. So it's communicating with your cardiovascular system, with your digestive system, with your immune system, and all of those messages are being translated back up into the brain. And the brain does communicate back down to the vagus nerve as well. So that's how the brain will communicate with the organs. But 80% of the pathways of the vagus nerve are sensory. That means that we're taking information from inside of the body, from outside of the body, between our nervous systems, and we're translating them back up to the brain. So, very complicated way to say this is your brain body connection. This is how your body is communicating to your brain. And this is also a primary component of the parasympathetic nervous system.
Yeah.
And the parasympathetic nervous system is the part of the nervous system that we want to activate when we get stuck in either a shutdown state, which ironically is part of the parasympathetic nervous system, but I would need a PowerPoint to explain that a little more clearly. And then the sympathetic nervous system, when we have this anxious energy, this go, go, go energy, we're feeling very angry, irritable, activated. So whenever we're activating the vagus nerve, when we're activating that brain body connection, we are going to be turning on the parasympathetic nervous system and educating our body that we have the capacity to have a little more control.
Yeah.
So a lot of the activities, particularly in the purple portion of the deck, which is the portion about resilience, have to do with toning the vagus nerve. Because every time we tone the vagus nerve, we are turning on the parasympathetic nervous system, and we're doing something that we call increasing vagal tone, which is just a fancy way of saying that we're continuously activating the vagus nerve. And when we do that, research shows us that we can actually heal trauma at a subcortical level. So below the conscious mind, we can start to heal the nervous system if we continuously, conscientiously activate the vagus nerve. And high vagal tone, so this pattern of activating the vagus nerve again and again, it's shown to decrease depression, decrease anxiety, decrease immune system dysfunction, decrease inflammation. So there's so many beautiful benefits of activating the vagus nerve, and it's one of the primary ways that we can quote unquote hack your nervous system.
Yeah. Beautiful.
So that's part one. Very simple. There's a lot more to it. We could definitely do another podcast where we just talk about that.
Yes, please. I was just thinking that. I'm like, I must have you for a part two, because I'm like, there's just so many things that still need to be discussed. Got it. Love it.
Yeah. So to come. But the second part of that is, how do we activate the vagus nerve? And to put it very simply, we want to look at the organs that the vagus nerve innervates. So the vagus nerve is going to be innervating our throat. It's going to be innervating our lungs. It's going to be innervating our belly. So any activities that we can do to activate those organs are going to be toning the vagus nerve. So starting from the top of the body, the eyes, really strangely, there's nerves in the back of the eyes that connect to the base of the skull, which is where the vagus nerve actually starts. So anytime we're doing things, not anytime, but there are specific activities that we can do with our eyes that activate the vagus nerve. You can literally just soften your eyeballs into your head, soften all of the muscles around your eyes, soften your eyes into your head. That is going to relax the nerves at the base of the skull, and it's going to activate the vagus nerve.
Beautiful.
You can do lateral eye movements, so side to side eye movements. That is also going to do the same thing. It's going to activate the nerves at the base of the skull. It's going to activate the vagus nerve. And also it does some super magic to your brain, where it connects the two hemispheres of the brain, gets the brain talking to each other again, takes the energy out of the survival portions of the brain and puts it into a part of your brain where you can actually think logically.
Beautiful. So, and I'll just interrupt
here.
That's very similar to EMDR, because there's different ways of doing EMDR, but that's how I do my EMDR. I follow a little dot as I'm reliving trauma, which sounds really simple, very effective, just saying, but like, whoo,
very.
You feel that.
Yes. And if you think about that, why EMDR works is because we're taking traumatic memory doesn't get stored in the prefrontal cortex. It gets stored in the limbic system. So when we're doing side-to-side eye movements and you're being asked to bring up a traumatic memory, it's almost like we're doing a transfer of data from the limbic system into the prefrontal cortex. And where we can, in the prefrontal cortex, we have a way to differentiate time. When we're in a trauma brain, our hippocampus is not activated. So we cannot tell the difference between past and present. So when we're in the prefrontal cortex, we can actually give a timeline to the trauma. And that can allow our system to say, oh, okay, this is something that happened in the past. This is no longer happening right now.
Yeah.
Trauma brain discerns that everything is happening right now.
Yeah.
Right. So, EMDR is a lot more complex than just the side-to-side eye movements, but we can still use the technology of the side-to-side eye movements to assist, right? And then if we move down to the throat, anytime we're doing anything that activates the throat, we can gargle, we can hum, you can do ujjayi breathing if you're into yoga. There's a reason why yoga is so healing, and part of it is because we're incorporating these breath styles that are inherently very healing. There's a reason why monks are chanting constantly and why they're totally chilling, and it's because they're constantly activating their vagus nerve constantly. So this technology is built into all of Eastern medicine naturally, and Eastern practices, period. And in the Western world, we're slowly starting to understand what we're even doing. But anytime that you are vibrating the vocal cords, you're going to be activating the vagus nerve.
And it's so easy to do. And it's like, when you're in a good mood, what are you doing? You're humming, you're singing, you're making sound. And it just shows you, even like,
right? All those things. Yes. Any expression of pleasure is going to naturally activate the vagus nerve.
Absolutely. And then it's like, what happens when you're frustrated? You make that like puff and puff. And that's literally like your nervous system's like, we're just going to let out some steam here, pushing that little button. And it's like, there's a reason for that. And it's like, I know, like, when we do it nowadays, sometimes people, like, this has happened to me in nursing, when people are like, well, that was rude. And I was like, did I let out a sound because I'm in a high stress situation? I'm like, that's not me being disrespectful. And I'm just like, wow, it's like, you even shame people when they do automatically like whew, like let out a sigh. It's like, what's wrong? What's wrong
Right.
with you? So it's like these are things that are ingrained in our like primal parts of us of like, this is how you
Mm-hmm.
handle stress. This is how you release stress. So do that, like let out a ha, let it go.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes, that is such a good point. And it also just really colors this experience of repression that we have
Mhm.
in the Western world. I mean, I remember being a young person and going to yoga class, and there was that one person who was like, ah, and I would get so annoyed. I'm like, oh, this person thinks they rule the class. They think they can just make all these noises. It's so rude. No,
Yeah.
this is our natural expression that we're
Yeah.
constantly being told to repress, 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 repress.
And I was going to say, especially like being feminine, it's like you got to be a good girl. You got to not make sound. You got to let that, oh, you're so emotional. You're crying. And it's like, no, 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 no. Make sound, cry, like be ugly. Those are ways you process and like move energy and trauma through your body. And it doesn't have to be a big T trauma. It can be like, I just got stuck in traffic for 2 hours and now I'm running late and now I'm
Right,
about it. It's like even that little micro trauma needs to be moved
right,
in your body because it's like if you don't move it, shift it, it just gets cemented into you. And it's like
right.
it's a very nurse thing, but it's like better out than in. Just let it out. You need to vomit.
Yep,
Vomit. Please. Nurses are happy when people
yep,
do. Like it needs to come out. And that's also with energy and trauma and anything that's like a heavier emotion. Like feel your ugly emotions, but do it in a way that is like obviously respectful, but like fully process it as opposed to just like a little tiny bit and then shove the rest down.
right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I use a really disgusting metaphor in my therapy, which is like either you're going to be farting around the whole time, like you're emotionally constipated.
Oh
And
God.
what we do is we do the safe thing and we're like, well, I'm just going to like let
Like,
one slide,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then, but we're crop dusting everyone around us with this negative, not actually giving ourselves permission for a full release. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
we need to release it.
But like
And
actually, like if you're eating, you need to poop. Like energy in,
right,
energy out, emotions in,
right,
emotions out. Like it's just like I don't understand why it's like so shamed. Like I love working with anger. It's a wonderful thing to work with. And then when you work with it, then you're like, okay, I'm done. Like it's
right,
not like you're just gonna be angry all the time. So yeah, no, I
right.
agree. Just let it out. So let out the emotions, let it all go. Love that. Okay.
Yes. So just to round out that last question, because we do still have the bottom half of
Yes,
the
please. I was
body
gonna
that
say,
we
I'm
can
like, please
work
go
with.
back to it. Yes.
So, and this is relatively common knowledge in the health world, but diaphragmatic breathing.
Yeah.
When we do diaphragmatic breathing, belly breathing, like this horizontal breath where we're not breathing up into our chest, which is a fight or flight kind of breath. When we breathe into our belly, we're going to activate the vagus nerve.
Yep.
And breath holding, 4-7-8 breathing is sort of like the status quo of breath holding and long exhale. So inhale for 4 counts, hold for 7 counts, exhale for 8 counts.
Mhm.
Any of these sort of breath patterns are going to activate the vagus nerve. However, when I am feeling anxious, it's very difficult for me to go into those breath patterns. So I use other ways to navigate, which I think may be a question that I'm just going to segue into.
Yes. And I think it's a perfect segue. So it's like, I completely agree. And I feel this as well, where it's like when you're doing the thing and you're like completely relaxed and you're like teaching others, mentoring others, you have a client in front of you, you got all your tools. It is perfect. And you're like, this is how,
Mm-hmm.
namaste, blessings. It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
You're triggered. And then all of a sudden, like shit hits the fan when you're just like, I have no tools. I just need to go on Instagram. I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. I'm just pacing. What will you do? What is your go-to that, like, for the most part, will get you back down into a calm state?
Yes. So I have a few. I have a few go-tos. My first one is definitely bilateral stimulation. So lateral eye movements, when we pop our eyes side to side, that's a way of doing bilateral stimulation. There are other ways to do it. I generally do it tapping. So I'll cross my arms over my chest onto opposite shoulders and I'll tap one shoulder and then the other. and it's incredibly calming. Anytime that you're touching the top half of your body as well, the nerves on the top half of your body are very closely connected to the parasympathetic nervous system. So if you're palpating the top of your body and you're giving yourself bilateral stimulation, tapping one hand and then the other. So once again, we're doing this job of reconnecting the hemispheres of our brain, getting our logical brain back online so we're not stuck in these circular thinking patterns. And we're doing something that's very calming. It also is a hug to yourself. So it's kind of like a do-it-all for me, doing that kind of bilateral stimulation. Going for a walk, I kind of don't care where I am. I will get outside and I will start walking. Walking is probably one of the most relaxing things for me of all time. And then putting like an ice pack on my neck, which again, this is where our vagus nerve begins and lives, and also on my chest. I'll put an ice pack on my chest and just breathe with that sensation. So you might not have your cold plunge, but it doesn't mean you don't have access to cold therapy. If you have a bag of peas in your freezer, do people still have bags of peas in their freezer? If they do, if you have
Everyone
any
should.
frozen
This is
veggies,
a public service announcement. Get a bag of peas.
and you place them on even on your belly, right? It's really, really a helpful hack to remember where your vagus nerve lives. And if you're thinking your neck, your throat, your heart, your belly, if you work with those parts of your body, you're going to be assisting yourself in regulating your nervous system.
Beautiful. No, I love that. And it's like, these are easy tools, but I think that it's hard. No, they're easy tools and they're easy to forget. And that's one thing that I always recommend for my clients of when you know what works for you, like what's your self-care practice? What's your thing that really works? Write it down. So then when you're in a state, you can just look at the list. You don't have to think. Because side note, when you're in a sympathetic state, your brain shuts down. You become
right.
dumb. You're meant to either play dead or run. So it's like all your energy leaves your brain. So you're not gonna, like, if you're an incredibly logical being and you know it, that's great. You won't when you're in that state, when you're triggered. So it's like, write down your list. When you go through the beautiful deck that you're all going to buy, pretty please, they're fantastic. Just saying, subtle hint. Look at the ones that are the most important for you, the ones that you know really work, put them out there and then just see it. So then when you're in that moment, you know, you're like, okay, yeah, do the thing. Like I love the butterfly tapping, like that works so well. And it's like, actually, I found that in COVID when I was in therapy and I was obviously not in a good state. And the therapist was like, okay, give yourself a hug. I'm like, what is wrong with you? This is stupid. I'm upset. Listen to me. And then she's like, start tapping. And I was like, I don't think this is working. This is really dumb. I don't like it. And then all of a sudden I was like, ah. And I was like, what the hell did you just do?
No. And you know what? It's so funny because I think this is why it's important to also give people context to what they're actually doing. Right?
Yes.
Because when I first saw butterfly hugs, I saw it in one of the kids' therapy manuals that I had. And I was like, that looks stupid. I'm not going to have this kid tap on themselves in that way because that doesn't look like it's doing anything. And so I just completely passed over it as if it was nothing. And then as I'm doing this work and understanding what we're actually activating in the body, it is the most simple things that are the most effective. We like to forget that because I think that sometimes we kind of want healing to be complicated so we can feel like it's out of our reach.
Yeah. Ooh.
When in reality, it is the most simple things done every single day that are going to be the most effective. Because if you're only doing these things when you're in crisis, then you're not teaching your body that this can be a constant state of existence. Being able to have a map back to regulation.
No, it's true. And that's why like
that part is really important.
And like people need to do this regularly and they need to learn this when they're in a calm state. So they're absorbing it and then learning those tools. And that's like also building resilience. Like, I mean, the pandemic shook everyone in some way. Everyone was affected and under a lot of stress, regardless where you were, what your occupation was and all that. but it's like resilience is hard to build in the moment. I mean, you're going to obviously build it in the moment, but it's really nice to have a little bit of a foundation of some of these tools and some of these techniques. So then when things do happen, which, side note, life's always going to throw a curveball at you at some point. Like you can't control everything. And then all of a sudden something happens and then you're like spiraling. But if you do these techniques on a regular basis, and I mean, like when you're brushing your teeth, just start humming, gurgle water. Like that's actually not hard to do. It doesn't cost anything. You do it for like what, a minute? Like everyone has that in their capacity. And it's not, I don't care how busy you are, you have time for that. The techniques don't take a long time, but when you do them on a regular basis, you literally build your resilience. So then when something does happen, you bounce back easier and you're not,
right.
I don't know what the right word would be, not like you're scarred, because you're not ever scarred per se, but it's like you're going to like brush it off faster and then just go back because you have this like, not a barrier around you, but this like you're so protected. Your nervous system's so robust and strong. And that's like honing your vagal nerve is so important. And I think that's outrageous that we don't know this. This isn't common knowledge. Like I'm a nurse of 11 years and I found this out on my own. No one ever taught me that. I was a trauma neuro nurse. Can we just talk about how that's ridiculous? Not common knowledge.
Wow. Well, you want to hear something even more ridiculous? I'm not even going to name my school because I won't degrade it like that, but my grad school program did not have a single course on trauma specifically. I went to 0 classes on trauma. I learned how to diagnose. I learned pathology. I learned to do a clinical interview. I did not learn about trauma, and trauma is the bedrock of most nervous system dysregulation. If not all nervous system dysregulation. Right? Whether we're talking about big T trauma or we're talking about this complex trauma, which is essentially just relational trauma, which, newsflash, unless you were born to like the most transcendent parents on the face of the planet, inherently we all have a modicum of complex trauma that we need to work out. And, you know, if we're going to go depth psychology here, I do feel like working through that is a key to our evolution as human beings. Absolutely. And also, if we don't work through it, then it's the key to our sort of like staying in these shutdown spaces or staying in the anxiety spaces.
Yeah. And it's absolutely ridiculous how backwards the system is. Like I knew I was going to leave nursing and I was going to become a psychotherapist because I have a nursing degree. I can actually become a psychotherapist very, very easily. Like it's more paperwork than anything else, which is concerning that like they wouldn't give me a lot more additional training. Insurance companies won't pay for a nurse who's a psychotherapist. Yet I'm literally a trauma nurse giving mental health all day, every day. Like, what the hell? Are you kidding me? But a social worker is okay. And like a clinical psychologist who went to school for psychology is, which I know part of my undergrad was psychology. I specialized in that. So I'm just like, what? That doesn't make sense. And I think it's frustrating because it's like, there's sometimes people who want to work with me. And I'm not a clinical psychotherapist, so I'm not covered under insurance. But I will tell you that doing work with your nervous system and energy and actually leaning into trauma is going to be what gives you those big moments as opposed to regular talk therapy. And again, not saying therapy is bad, but I think people need to really widen their idea of therapy. So go into things that really use mind-body connection, really talk about the nervous system, people who are trained to work with trauma and like, not just hashtag like trauma informed, but like properly know how to work with trauma. And it's like, you want to get a therapist that does these sort of techniques. Like it took me a while to find my therapist, but again, she does internal family systems, beautiful parts work, so strong. And then the EMDR, right?
Yes.
Oh. So it's like, when people are like, I've been in therapy for like 10 years. And I'm just like, yeah, because all you do is like, here's my problem. Let's talk about it. Perfect. Now take it home. I'm like, okay, thank you. Here's my money. Where did you go? Nowhere. So it's like, we need to change how we do this work. And there's a lot of people who want to do the work, but then they're like, well, I don't know, I'll get a therapist. And I was like, no, you'd be better off just like humming and dancing because that will move the energy out of you. So I'm so happy that you are here and like created a source, a resource that's so easy to use, and you brought it all together. Because I think that there's just like scattered all this, like all these techniques are all over the place, and we
Right.
don't know them, and we don't know why they're important, which again is important for us to have the understanding of like your vagus nerve is super, super important. Let's stimulate that. Oh, I
Yes.
absolutely love
Yes.
that. So good.
Yes. And I just want to piggyback on what you just said, because, and I do think this is sort of a product of our society. It's very much like either or, right? Like either we're doing the somatic work or we're going to therapy. And I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to sort of be well-rounded with the approaches that you're using with yourself, because as you said before, it can be very easy to get into somatic work or yoga or something and just think that that's the end all be all, and I don't have to deal with these internalized messages and conditioning that I have, and I'm just going to sweat it out. I'm just going to work with my body. But we're a mind body system, right? The vagus nerve goes up to the mind. That means that we're having stories that are coming through the brain that we can work with through the body. But imagine if we're working on both ends of the spectrum, how much more effective we can be. It's health is health. It shouldn't be a special thing. Holistic health. Our health is holistic, period. If we are not addressing all sides of our health, we're not helping ourselves to the capacity that we have the ability to. So yes, do your somatic work, and yes, talk to someone. It's really, really important to be able to feel safe with someone and sharing intimate information and being vulnerable, because again, we're missing that so much in our day-to-day world. How are you? Fine. How are you? Fine. Let me talk a little shit about someone, and great, have a good day, and we bypass a lot of the darkness that's really important to give voice to, because otherwise that as well gets pressed down within our psyche and becomes depression.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's like, I think every single person needs to have someone who's trained to help them through stuff. And I know it is challenging in terms of finances, but I think this is one of those things where you need to invest in this. And it's not like, yeah, my mental health, I'll deal with it later. But if you're not dealing with your mental health, your nervous system's overactivated. So then it's like anything you're eating, you might as well be eating garbage because you're not absorbing it.
Right.
How many hundreds of dollars are you spending on sleep supplements or like, anti-bloat? Like I was obsessed with that because I was like, I can't get rid of this bloating. Why am I bloated? Because I'm a trauma nurse and I'm not doing any inner work. That's why. So it's like, stop spending money on all those other things or the quick fixes. It's like, I have issues with my acne. I need to get like acne stuff. And like, then you're spending money on beauty stuff. I'm like, the moment you deal with your nervous system, it all resets. Your bloating goes away, your nausea goes away, you start sleeping magically. Like I used to never be able to sleep, and now I'm just like, oh, this is magic. I could have done this all my life. It's like all this stuff goes away. So it's like, please, please, please invest in your nervous system and educate yourself, know what you can do for yourself, but then also get someone to help you. I don't live here alone, like at all. Like I've always had multiple therapists, mentors, healers. I went through a lot of different healing modalities. And it's like, you don't just wake up like this. And also, just because you didn't have a big T trauma doesn't mean you don't have trauma in your body. We all have trauma in our body.
Right.
And it's like our, I guess, beautiful journey to heal and release that, because everybody wants to have inner peace and bliss and abundance and joy and like pleasure and all that. And I'm like, that is on the other side of doing trauma work. Like you're not going to bypass that. There is no little bridge and you just like jump. You're not going to. So really and truly, anything and everything you want and desire is on the other side of doing the work. And it doesn't need to be horrible. I mean, it can be a little uncomfortable, but I promise you, you ignoring it, avoiding it, numbing it is significantly more uncomfortable than just going in, doing the work, and then be like, oh, that's it? That way I did it? And also, you're never just like done. It's just like next.
Yeah.
or
Side note.
like paint the wrong picture here of like, guys, I'm healed. Everything's perfect. No.
I'm never going to get triggered ever again.
Blessings,
Yeah.
like rainbow, sunshine, like
yeah, exactly.
not.
But
It's like when you go through the big things that you've repressed for a few decades, which chances are, if you're listening to this podcast, you're at least 2 decades old. Once you do that, you open up so much space to then have the capacity to handle anything. And it's like, I think that's something that's really, really important for people to know, of like, you really grow as a person when you've done this work, and it's something that you take forward. I'm so happy that you are here and that you created this beautiful deck that makes it easier for people to actually access and do. And I mean, they're pretty, like you want to like buy them and look at them, but then they're also like, oh shoot, there's like good truth here. Love, love, love. So I have one more question for you, and I ask everyone this.
Yes.
This is the Discover Your Joy podcast. What brings you joy?
Oh, well, Mr. Little, for one. If you're listening to the podcast, you won't see this, but if you're watching, you'll see I have 4 rescue babies, and Mr. Little is one of them. And being with animals is like such a massive joy in my life. And man, dancing, walking, I know it sounds so mundane, but I go on a 5-mile walk every day. That's my resilience machine. I just really need to get that in order to be a clear channel for the clients that I work with and for creativity that wants to come through. So being outdoors and doing that 5-mile walk is my jam. I think I would probably lose my mind without it. Yeah, I mean, it's the simple stuff. Reading in the morning, traveling, being with my beautiful wife. She's a mastermind and a therapist, and yeah, the little things definitely bring me a ton of joy.
Love that. And then it's like when you're doing the work, it is the little things at the end of the day what bring you joy, and they will actually give you joy because you've done the inner work. Like it's like a really cyclical thing. So take it away, guys, do the inner work, regulate the nervous system, please. Is everything you want and desire is on the other side of that work. So
amen. Amen.
Thank you so, so much for being a guest on the podcast. Guys, we're absolutely going to be doing another one. So we'll be diving into even more nervous system goodness. So for now, Brianna, thank you for being here. I appreciate you. I'll link all of your things down in the link below so you can find her and get the deck. And I will see you guys shortly. Thank you.